Ladies and gentlemen, Convicted Mindset here with one of my biggest guests of all time. And honestly, there's a bigger story to this. Rene, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. We get if I'm not, I guarantee I'm not the biggest guest.
No,
Maybe the
man.
tallest. Or
And let me tell you why. No, let me tell you why. It's a true story. So I was driving, we were on a double date, my wife and I'm going to say about 4, 5, 6 months ago. And the couple that was in front of us who was driving, he knew that I was kind of on this kick to try to audio book a book a week for the year. And he said, "Hey, have you read this book?" And I said, it's on my list here. And I pulled out my phone and I said, "Here it is." And he said, "You got to bump it to the top. You got to read it. It's changed my life." And I thought, whoa, for real? And he said, "Yeah." And this is a guy I look up to. And he said, "Yeah, it's absolutely changed my life." So I said, "All right, boom." That literally next day, it was on my doorstep, and I have read it, and incredible book. And so a lot of what I do is, going into the incarcerated citizens and pouring into them. And I said, "Man, I've got to take a bunch of books inside." And so I did. And my inbox flooded. They communicate on a tablet system through kind of an email type system inside. And my inbox just went nuts. Men, women, old, young, like you name it. And it was the biggest response. And so the reason, in my opinion, that why I used that phrase, and I don't use it lightly, biggest guess, was because to date, everybody that has had the biggest impact without them even being to hear you has been you. And so I'm super excited for this moment to be able to take this inside. You're going to be broadcast to close to 750,000 individuals incarcerated in some capacity from the ages of 17, to 70. So that's the reason for me. It's always interesting how life works, and I think that that's the coolest part of what has been here. So
that's
my
huge.
it's so big, man. So I'm just so grateful, honestly.
I'm literally you got my brain thinking now. If that I did not know that was happening, but brother, like we got some talking to do if that's what's going on. I got ideas for you.
Oh, it's exactly what's going on. And the more that I can pour into these folks. And so a lot of where we're at, entrepreneurship, literacy, education, communication, you can boil it all down and into that Amplify Your Influence book in so many facets to me. And so one of the things that I want to start with that I think is a great misnomer, and my little boy, he's 11, he's our oldest. I try to pour this into him every day. Is life supposed to be easy or painful?
Is life supposed to be easy or painful? So this is maybe a continuation of our conversation, but I let go of the dream of searching for happiness or thinking that life is supposed to be happy. And if we're honest about it, most of life isn't happy. And those, if you go back and think of your happy moments, you have to struggle a little bit. I mean, you got to really kind of push yourself to go, what was happy? When was it? Oh, I remember a happy moment. They're fleeting. They're truly fleeting moments. And I don't think that's bad or sad, by the way. I don't think it's sad or bad. It's just not the purpose of life. And, most of life is struggle. Most of life is toil, suffering, and the grind, getting up when you don't want to, doing something when you don't want to, saying no to things you want to do. It's most of it is a level of suffering. And that I think is okay when you understand it. Because I think people that try to pursue happiness miss the journey. And the journey sometimes is very painful. But the journey is also when we're alive. If you want, the big house, you want this beautiful dream home, and you get the dream home, and all of a sudden you realize you're the same.
Yeah.
But who did you have to become to get the dream home?
Yeah.
And did you step on people, or were you a good person? Because there's ways to get there. And the how you achieved the dream home matters a lot more than the actual dream home, because you get to the dream home and all of a sudden you get there and you're like, okay, well, this didn't deliver what I thought it was going to deliver. Well, maybe I need a bigger one. And you go out and you pursue the bigger one. And then you realize that didn't do it. Well, maybe you pursue your car of your dreams, or, whatever of your dreams, these material external things. And you get to the end, or maybe halfway through midlife, and you go, so if these weren't the reasons, and they didn't deliver anything that I thought they would, well, what was my life about? And you realize that most of life was a struggle, and the journey to it was discipline, sacrifice, and suffering. And so I better learn to enjoy suffering, but more importantly, for a purpose of some sort.
Big time purpose. So as these individuals are suffering, you speak to them, I'm sure, at great length. As these individuals are suffering, where does the purpose come in?
Well, I think this is a big question, because when I say that, I don't want to diminish people's pain,
Mm-hmm.
because there are people right now that are suffering. And if you've got people that are incarcerated right now listening to this, I don't say that to diminish the pain that you might be feeling right now, or somebody that's going through divorce. Or I just got a phone call today that one of my former clients passed away, just collapsed and died. And two very close clients, three of them are close to them, and they tried to revive them. They couldn't. And that's suffering. That's painful. That's sad. But then at the end of all of this, we all can relate to pain and suffering in some way, shape, or form. And so then you got to ask yourself this question. And, we've got an ability to sort of put a narrative and a story around the suffering. If you're in jail right now, okay, well, why? Well, there's a sense to that. Did this happen to you? Is a lot of the things like, why is this happening to me? I was watching Breaking Bad last night, again for the second time with my wife, and that whole sort of that episode where just one thing after another is happening to Jesse, and he finally gets to the mobile home, and he stands on the outhouse, and he falls to the roof, and he lands inside the liquid, and it's just like one thing happening to him. And if those moments where we feel like one thing's happening after another, I've come to realize that we have a choice in that moment. And that's the question that we ask ourselves: is why is it happening to us? And then there's a concept of amor fati. Amor fati is a lover of fate, the lover of your life. If you can fall in love with your story, it's like, well, maybe there's a for me in this. Why did this happen for me? And if we can find the lesson in it somehow, because one thing we do know is that at some point this will pass, and we'll be able to tell a story about what happened. And if that story makes us a better person and can affect somebody or inspire somebody, then that maybe is the purpose, is so that I can be right here, right now, to inspire somebody. Now, at the end of it, it's easy to say that. In the middle of it, it's hard.
So where does that come from? Do you frame it as courage? Do you frame it as, how do we dive deep into these individuals to say your story one day? Because I know that I tell them all the time, it's your obligation to become great. It's your identity to use this mess and turn it into a message. And I think a lot of that takes courage, but I don't know if you have something additional or different.
Well, in the thousands of people I've dealt with in this, it's the one thing I cannot change is the past. Mm-hmm. And there's one thing I see over and over again is people are riddled with tragedy, with struggle, with abuse, alcoholism, death, suicide, murder. There's so many things that people have dealt with that are just tragic, and my heart bleeds. And then my next question is here's one thing I know: I can't change those bullet points of your life. I can't change the fact that your father committed suicide. I can't change the fact that you were abused in this way. I can't change the fact that you lost your son or your daughter. I go, and neither can you, but you can change the narrative and the story you decide to place on it and the meaning you decide. And so you have to ask yourself this question: for what purpose is this? And purpose is something I think people forget. You choose it. It's something you choose. It's not something I'm discovering. No, you choose it. And what purpose are you choosing to this? And there's an ownership component to purpose, which I think is beautiful, because I didn't realize that till I was later in life.
I don't think a lot of people do. I think we're told that we discover it along the way. We don't necessarily choose it. It chooses us.
And I think you're not far off in that either. Right. But I think there's a way to say, this is why I exist. And usually comes down to a decision of my story, the struggles and the lessons that I have and the things that I'm good at, And how do I combine those into making this world a little bit better place and serving the world somehow?
Serving the
And
world.
so you can serve the world in so many ways that are your choice, but their purpose, you can have a purpose and not live it. And so then it's meaningless. But
So,
and if you don't act on it, it's meaningless. And the action is a choice.
right.
And so right now, whatever it is, you might be in the middle of your suffering right now. And then so that might be the middle of you're in school. Suffering is the teacher if you listen to it. And so what am I trying to learn right now? And the thing about suffering too is that it brings us close to reality. Suffering builds empathy, it builds compassion, and it shows us the realities of life. And so if you think of suffering as sort of an education of some sort, and it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult work, and it's very experiential because you're living it. Well, what am I going to be able to teach as a result of this? What currency am I building? If you've been through, if you're alone, then you know what it's like to connect with somebody alone that's lonely. If you feel like you've gone through potential suicide and you got out of it, the next time you're meeting with somebody who's down, you're able to connect with them. Maybe your job is to, I've been in the depths and here's how I got out. And how many lives can you save because you have been in those shoes? Yeah, I haven't been in those shoes. And so we all can serve the world a little bit differently. And so in that moment, it's the choice to say, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to get something from it. And if I do like who I am, then I have to love the formula that created me. And the formula typically includes tragedy and suffering. So I have to love that as well.
Boy, that's deep.
If I don't love who I am, then we got to really maybe start being a different person then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's deep. To your point, I often remind individuals that they're perfectly positioned to help the people that they once were.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like we become the parents that we need. We become the parents that we needed. We become the leaders and the influences that we needed as kids.
Yeah.
That to me is part of the purpose. Like, what did I need? Well, if I grew up in the darkness, then maybe it's my job to be the light for those now.
Mm-hmm. And so I think oftentimes, and whether you're incarcerated physically or I've dealt with so many individuals that are mentally stuck. Right? And I don't think that you have to be confined in a 6x9 to be living out a confinement. So how do we communicate better, not only with ourselves, but with other people? How do we get that story out? I think we brush our teeth at night, we judge each other. You're looking in the mirror, you find all the negative things about yourself. How do we start to build ourselves so that we know our identity? And then that story, we use it as an ability and not a crutch.
Yeah, that's a tough one because that inner voice is a powerful, persuasive one.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this begins with a choice, a decision to say, I need to look at this differently, even if I don't feel it, even if I look in the mirror, I don't like who I see. If somebody hasn't chosen to look at this differently, it's beyond something an external person can do. Right? Because you have to make this decision saying, no matter what has happened, I have to choose to see something good here. And maybe it begins, well, I don't see anything good. Okay, well then today, what can you do good so that tonight you can say, at least today I did this good. Change is possible, but sometimes we take on too much change. And I was listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson say, so I can't make this change. Well, maybe your goals aren't small enough. And I was like, wait, hold on a second.
Oh,
what do you mean by that? I was like, okay, well, maybe you're taking on something too big. Maybe if you're obese and you're out of shape, well, maybe the treadmill's too big of a goal. Maybe it's just to stand right now. Okay, I stood. All right, well, let me go stand in 1 step. And then tomorrow it's stand in 2 steps. Stand in 3 steps. So it's only three steps in a day. Yeah, but you forget cumulatively over the course of 6 months, it's a lot of steps and a lot of movement. And there's something there, but change is possible, but sometimes the goals need to be set a little bit lower. And so, well, I can't love myself. Well, then set the goal a little bit lower. Love yourself just a little today. And what is loving myself? That's such a cheesy thing to say sometimes, even as a guy, even me, like, what does that mean? Sometimes it's to say, I like what I did today.
Yeah.
Maybe it's to say, I'm going to sleep 10 minutes longer. Maybe it's to say that I'm going to say no to something. Those are the actions of loving oneself. Something I don't want to do, I'm going to say no.
You talked
There's so many ways.
you talked about cumulative actions.
Mm.
I think that is a critical point. So many folks, right? It's the New Year's first resolution, day one. Everybody's gung ho, but like you said, whether it's compound interest financially or cumulative action, I don't think we place enough emphasis on that consistency to get to where we need to go.
Yeah. Well, somebody once said, we overestimate what we can do in a year, but we underestimate what we can do in 2 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we want this typically so quickly. We want the end result so fast, but 2 to 3 years is not a long time. Yet it is. I mean, the time is such a relative thing. It's all dependent on what it's compared to. But 2 to 3 years from now, something you will arrive most likely. The question is, will you arrive the same person or the person that has achieved something that's cumulatively worked towards something, small steps every single day?
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Let's pause for a minute. Tell the folks how you kind of got started and what led you to find your why, your purpose, how you chose that.
Ooh. So my my why, my purpose, the reason I do things is it's a combination of a lot of different stories. And there's stories from the Bible, there's stories from theology, there's stories from near-death experiences and philosophy that sort of came together for me to help me understand it. My background's behavioral neuroscience, but I there's a lot to it. Like, and I think that when you look at religion, if you go back beyond just a certain single religion, and there are certain studies that look at major concepts within different Bible texts and different religious texts, and there are certain ones that are found in all the major texts, the golden rule being one of them. That language is found in every major religious text in the world. And there's a lot more. One of the concepts that's found in religious texts that's common to all of them is the word toil, or sweat of the brow, the hard work, doing something hard work. And the story of Genesis said that God built the earth in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh. So there's a ratio there of 6 days work, 1 day rest, which I thought was fascinating. It wasn't 5 days work, 2 days rest. And so the sweat, work hard, there's a concept in life that work is meaningful and work is important. Let's just say it's important. And so then I combine that with the story of the talents that showed up in all four gospels. One of the only stories that showed up in all four. And the short version is God comes down and gives one person 1 talent, another person 3, another person 5. Comes back on a later date and says, person with 5, what'd you do? Well, I turned my 5 into 10. Wonderful, awesome, high five. Person with 3, what'd you do? I took 3 and turned them into 6. There you go, high five, good job. Person with 1 talent, they buried it, they hid it. And they said God was furious. One of those times he was most angry. I gave you a gift and you did not use it. And so there's almost some of the greatest sins, which I thought was fascinating. The not to use our gift is the sin, which I thought, okay. So then I spent 3 years studying this concept of work and leisure in college. And I always thought, work is the work you do, but then there's work, there's vocation, there's a job, there's different things like that. There's career, but the work is a vocation, which just means working towards something and a bigger purpose. And then the concept of leisure, I thought was like, yeah, going to a ball game with your buddies. No, it comes to find out leisure is the act of contemplation and reflection. And it's, if you look at, even in the story of creation, at the end of each day, what did God ask himself? Did I do good? Was it good? Which is contemplation, reflection. And it said that's one of the highest forms of prayer, which I thought was pretty cool. The self-reflection. Am I a good person? And the beautiful thing about am I a good person, if you can honestly answer it, it's the death of the ego. It's like, no, I'm not a good person today. It takes a lot of self-awareness and humility to be able to admit I wasn't good today. But the ego is what gets in the way of that. So that, the self-reflection, did I do good? And there was a study that was done I heard about this from Jack Canfield 20 some years ago about near-death experiences. I'm sorry, you asked, this is a complex answer, but there's a lot to it for me.
No.
And they studied, I think it was 2,700 cases of people that literally died, flatlined. They all reported seeing the light.
Okay.
And then they reported being met by relatives or lost, loved ones. And what was fascinating, though, is that they reported a common theme of 2 questions that were commonly asked. And the first one was, did you gain knowledge? I thought, okay, that's fascinating. And the second one was, did you expand your capacity to love? And I thought, okay, that's an interesting way of saying it. Not did you become more loving? Did you expand your capacity to love?
Ooh,
Meaning, it's easy to love people when times are good,
yeah.
but
And
what
good
about when somebody what's that?
and good people. It's easy
And
to
good
love good
people,
people, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But what about when somebody betrays you? What about when somebody has wronged you? What if somebody has done something? Can you still love them then? I mean, to me, grace is the weight room of love, right?
Ooh,
It's like you go in there and you grace is the unmerited favor, right? Undeserved forgiveness, undeserved love. They don't deserve it, but I'm going to give it anyways. That is the weight room. That's when you put a couple extra barbell, dumbbells on and putting on more weight, saying, okay, it's easy to love, but can I love now? Oh my God, I don't like this person.
mhm.
So expanding capacity to love to me is in those moments where it's not easy. And so you look at all those different pieces, and I say, my purpose is to gain as much knowledge as I can and utilize my gifts to make this a better place and further in God's creation,
Mm.
right? And while expanding my capacity to love. And so you look at all those different elements, and I can almost answer any question, any situation. Did I gain knowledge in this? Yes or no? And did it expand my capacity to love? I can almost answer anything that way. And so
Whoa.
when I find something that is like that universally truthful, I hold on to
Right. Boy, oh boy. And do those
it.
same two questions guide you in your day-to-day business activities and your endeavors?
I try. I mean, God, I wish I could say 100%, but that'd be
Right.
lying. It's it it definitely guides the work that we do and the projects that we take on.
Right.
And there are 50 projects right now that I'm being asked to do that I can't. I just won't. I don't have the energy. I don't have the passion. I don't have the love. It doesn't. Oh, it doesn't fit that criteria. And I mean, it's like I literally lose steam and I lose the wind in the sail when I think about doing something outside of my purpose. And not because I'm self-righteous in it. It's moreover, I just don't. Once you see what you're supposed to do, anything outside of that feels wasteful. And it just feels wrong. I'm just not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I could go sell a certain product and make a ton of money. Yes, there's certain technologies. Yes, there's certain companies that wanted to buy what we're doing. It just doesn't, it's not what I'm supposed to do.
I
So I can't.
I love that. I want to dive into it for all of the entrepreneurs listening. I call it wasted movement oftentimes. You know, we feel that when we get a little bit of steam, we get a little bit of notoriety, we get a little bit of the reshare on social media, everybody starts to ask, and it's hard for us to say no. And so I love that perfect alignment or recognizing how to be in alignment. Did that come naturally for you? Is it still difficult to turn things down? And what's your advice to the people who are right in the thick of it, who are wasting time and movement?
It's never easy to turn down opportunity.
No, never.
And I mean, and the thing is, distractions come, clothed as opportunities.
Ah,
I mean, they look, opportunity is a dangerous word sometimes when you have a purpose, because opportunity could be that distraction. And it's not saying it's even bad, right? There's technology companies that want me to help them out. And man, I really love them and they're so cool and they're good friends. And I'm going, okay, what am I doing? I'm already out of time. Like I don't have any more time. And then I start realizing my time is spread so thin so that the things that really need my time aren't getting it. Well, I'm doing these events that I probably shouldn't be doing because they're not fitting the criteria in the model. And then now I realize I'm gone. We did an example. We said no to an event and I was here for 3 days, which was phenomenal. I got a chance to be with my family, everything. And then we realized how many other events and times and phone calls and Zoom calls I could take that created other opportunities that really fit what I was best at. And it was exponential, even the revenue.
mm,
And I sat with my wife, I go, do you realize if I would have taken that other event, XYZ wouldn't have happened?
yeah.
And we've proven over the last 6 months, like 5 or 6 times. And then it was like, I had to build that own sort of like internal confidence to go, okay, I need to say no more. Even though I say it, like I need to say more, even more.
Yeah. I love that internal confidence. I love it. That's a good way to frame that.
It's like a
Um,
conviction too. And I think when I say no, it creates opportunities for others to have that opportunity.
oh, that's a unique way to look at it.
Yeah.
When whenever I tell anybody about your book or I'll quote a line from you or send them your Instagram post, I often use this phrase and I just go, hey, check this out. This guy's like the king of communication. And so I think that in today's world, communication has become kind of lazy. I don't know if there's a good word for it. Rarely do we sit down one on one, engage, undistracted. So how do we kind of learn first how to communicate, and then how do we communicate efficiently with what we're trying to accomplish?
So I'm going to ask a question back. When we say lazy, how have you seen it? Because I think people get comfortable in certain communication styles. Well, I sent a message, should be enough, text or, an email. So can you define more how you've seen it? Because I can tailor that answer.
Yeah, for sure. So lazy, what I mean by that is in today's world, we're not really getting down to the root of our conversation. There's a lot of like, hey, Rene, how are you? Fine. How's things? Good.
Mm.
There really isn't an in-depth communication pattern to where we sit down and go, hey, Rene, like, how did this X, Y, and Z play out for you? What are this one, two, and three things that you're right? Some real communication, some in-depth dialogue. We're kind of surface level text.
So I'd almost say that you're saying we're lacking connection.
Even better, you're right. I
And
am.
maybe there's like, to me, the only way I know how to look at it is how is it my fault in that sense?
Okay.
Because I can't control the other person, but I can control how I ask questions and the kinds of questions that I ask and the conviction in which I ask them, the timing in which I ask them. I think sometimes we ask, stupid questions. And I always say three things. I said, most of us don't put much thought into the questions that we ask. I loved your setup for even for this podcast. You put thought into the questions and look at what it brings. I don't talk about what I just talked about. This is something I don't share. And I think maybe one other podcast, somebody caught me off guard. I did it like last year or a year before. But we don't put much thought into the questions that we ask. And two, for some reason, we feel compelled to answer questions, even if they're stupid or not well thought out. And then thirdly, the person asking the question is in charge, even if they don't, or is leading, even though they don't realize it. And so when you realize that, all three of those together say, I feel compelled to let somebody lead me down a path they didn't put much thought into. I don't like that equation. And so I think maybe we need to put more intention behind the questions. If we're not connecting, if we're not getting engagement, we're not getting something, I then need to ask better questions. I need to engage more, maybe do some homework ahead of time and not give up when they don't get a response right away if people aren't used to that. So I think that, one is the self-awareness, like you're saying, let's build self-awareness. Are you really connecting in your communication? And if not, don't blame them, blame your question.
I love that. I love that. One thing that you often I hear you say is one of the most powerful things you have is the ability to present an idea. How did explain that further?
Well, I think that think of the power of an idea.
Hmm?
Have you had an idea haunt you?
Yes.
It's just like, don't get that idea in their head. Why? Because it grows like a weed. Ideas can grow and they fester.
Why
And
is
if you,
like neuroscience? Why is that?
I think, I think it's because ideas shine a light on possibility.
Okay. Take your time. We got time.
Ideas shine a light on possibility. And when an idea is presented, it's like you taste the possibility for a minute of something new. And like my mother used to always say, a slave that was born into slavery will remain a slave their whole life. But if that slave gets a taste of freedom for even a split second, they'll spend the rest of their life searching for it again. And when we're talking about slavery, we're talking about slavery of mentality, slavery of thinking, right? Slavery in relationships. Somebody's enslaved in a relationship that they shouldn't be in, and they get a taste of what it feels like not to. They can't, that idea of possibility will not go away. Somebody who's been enslaved in their job, they get a taste of entrepreneurship or freedom in that sense. They can't get that out of their head. if you've been enslaved with a certain way of thinking and you get a sense of what would possibility thinking feel like, it's that thought that just won't go away. And so an idea will fester and grow. And so to me, to present an idea in a way that people will listen to and then take action on is one of the sweetest experiences in life.
I love that. On the thought of this 2 million-year-old brain that we have. So explain, as surface or as deep as you want to go, what role does the limbic system play in making us, right? Like, walk through that with me. There's a lot of people right now that are in their heads. Could be the recession, the depression, it could be incarceration. There's a lot of buzzwords floating around right now.
Yeah. So this guy, many, many years ago, this guy by the name of Dr. Paul MacLean, he was the executive director, head of the National Institute of Mental Health. And he developed this theory called the triune brain theory. And it went crazy. What it said basically is we have three major brain systems that dictate our behavior depending on how much stress we're under. We have the reptilian brain, and they call it the lizard brain. You hear things like that. And it's in charge of your autonomic functions, your breathing, your heart rate, your digestion. All the things are automatic. And when it's in charge of things like breathing, heart rate, digestion, things that control your survival. If you don't breathe, you die. You don't digest your food, you die. You don't beat your heart, you die. It's given the ultimate authority. So it can shut the rest of the brain down to protect itself. And so the limbic system is sort of that next level up. They call the reptilian brain, they call the limbic system the mammalian brain, because a lot of the features and the traits and the attributes of the limbic system are also found in mammals. So it's an evolved brain. And by the way, this theory, triune brain theory, was debunked in the 90s. But so it's literally inaccurate, but metaphorically very accurate. And so I talk about it from a metaphor standpoint, right? So limbic system houses, your emotions. It's also the gateway to long-term memory. It's also the home of our value system. And so there's a lot of very powerful things in the limbic system. There's also 35,000 times more neurons just compressed together, what we call a ganglia. 35,000 times more than, say, in a logical center. And so when we make emotional decisions, that's why it's so difficult to overcome. That's why we buy based on emotion. When we get emotionally, in love with somebody, try to talk somebody out of their church. That's a limbic activity. You're not going to do that because it's a values principles thing. And so it's such a powerful component of who we are and how we exist. And so people join churches based on the limbic system. The Ku Klux Klan is, people join that because of that, the belief system behind it. Nazis were the same thing. And it's a powerful, powerful brain, but it's also what, will turn around an organization. It's what will turn around your life. It's also what will take down your life. It's what we give into. And so it's the emotions piece, right? The amygdala being the big component there of the emotions. But it's what regulates, adrenaline, noradrenaline, all sorts of things that are happening in the brain there. And so the hijacking comes from there in terms of when we get emotionally hijacked and we can't think clearly. You're too emotional, Rene. Well, you're too limbic is really what they're saying. And so, but the limbic also provides the beauty and the color to life as well, right? It's what's hardwired into our brains is our values between the ages of 9 and 13 and then locked in by age 21. So there's a lot that happens in that wonderful part of our brain.
I love that. I love that. It's so brilliant. In the world the double tap world of social media, one thing that you just talked about, the emotion, how do we learn to be vulnerable and how do we become okay with it?
So, gosh, vulnerability is, I think Brene Brown said it's a superpower, but let's go beyond that. Let's go take that a little bit further. Working with a lot of men in business, vulnerability is not something that is accepted. And I would say the same for women. Women report back saying that vulnerability is not accepted for them. And so then if you hear that men can't be, nor can women, but women think they're the only ones and men think they're the only ones, right? It's funny how the opposite sex thinks the other has it better. And so we go, okay, so why vulnerability? Well, vulnerability in business, we talk about how much vulnerability should we show. My answer is always the same: as much as necessary, but as little as possible. So it's like, how much of a story should I share? Well, as much as necessary, but as little as possible. Well, what should the temperature be? As high as necessary, but it's not any higher, right? It's like there's a fine line between vulnerability and how much story should I share and how long should it take. And that stuff. And so there's a purpose to vulnerability because it humanizes us. And if I'm doing business with you, it's very easy for me to think of you as a brand, think of you as a company, think of you as a price point or as a gatekeeper, think of you as the person that controls my income, being my boss, right? Or somebody that could be a threat. So these aren't human attributes at all. But when I see your story and I see the vulnerable side of it, now you become human.
Mm.
And so vulnerability humanizes us. And then when we're humanized, we're connected limbically. And all those neurons we're talking about before start to bond. And with a process called neural coupling begins to happen. That's what happens to storytelling, by the way. Neural coupling is when, if I tell a brain, my brain lights up like a Christmas tree, but also so does the listener in the same way. And so they mirror each other. So it's called mirroring. They call them mirror neurons. They're not no such thing as a mirror neuron. It's just our neurons begin to mirror and couple together like a couple would, right? They bond and they connect. And so the same thing happens in vulnerability. If I can imagine your story, I embody your story. Because when you tell a story, I don't know the difference between you telling a story and me living it.
Mm.
And that's people are like, well, no, that's not true. I said, well, okay, hold on a second. Have you ever cried during a movie? They were like, yeah. I said, you know they're actors, right? Well, logically, you know they're actors, but why'd you cry then? If you know that there's makeup and there's cameras, they said, cut, action, and it's made up, but yet we still cry because our brains take on the role of the protagonist and we become that person. And we're the ones that lost the championship. We lost the son. Our relationship with someone. They cheated on us, if in the movie. The same is true when somebody tells us their story about vulnerability and they're just an ounce of vulnerability. We embody their story as if it was our own and we connect. Leaders need to understand the power of an ounce of it. It's huge.
Wow. You just unlocked a whole new level for me. For so long, I've wondered, and this just happened a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I were at a table of 12 other couples, and someone asked about my story. And for me, I've been telling the story for a decade, and so you just kind of rattle it off. But in this particular instance, I felt that I should go a little bit deeper.
Mm,
Rene, it unlocked the table.
I bet. Immediately.
It gave this woman the ability to be comfortable about her trauma, this man to talk about his children. And so I keep telling my wife, Melissa, the more that I authentically communicate my story instead of like a Wall Street headline,
Yep.
Unlocks the table, Rene.
It's beautiful. It's a gift. You just think of the gift that you just gave all of those folks. And the gift was permission.
Mm.
Permission to be human. Like permission to be human, what does that mean? Well, I'm scared sometimes. I'm sad sometimes. I'm angry sometimes. I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm proud. I'm proud of something I did. But we're not usually allowed to be proud. We're not allowed to be scared. We're not allowed to be sad. We're not allowed to, be mad. I mean, there's so many controls to the human experience. And when somebody has the courage to say, "Excuse me, can I swear on this podcast?"
Right.
It's like, F the controls.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this anyways. And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, thank God somebody did it. And it's like, okay. Right. It's like we can all, and it's the creation of psychological safety is really what's created then. Psychological safety is the psychological experience of physical safety. So physical safety, if we're not there, we go into fight flight mode.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Because where there's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they were psychologically unsafe, we still function from fight or flight. And so all the attributes of that experience are embodied in corporate America. And so, there might be a tiger or a bear in the boardroom, but there might be the proverbial one, the boss that's ready to bite our heads off. And so I'm not psychologically safe. So I will be in fight or flight freeze mode.
Boy, that's fascinating, man. I know you've got a hard stop here in 5 minutes, so
I'm good.
Okay. Man, I could just deep dive forever. I don't want to take your time. So anyhow, one thing that I do often that I need your help with, you mentioned Brene Brown, and she has this phrase. She says, "Don't shrink and don't puff up." One thing that I experience often are moments of uncomfortable power, as you say. Somebody says, "Hey, I just watched your interview with Rene and it changed my life," and they kind of go down. It makes me uncomfortable, Rene. And so I kind of say stupid things. Oh, like someone will walk up to me at church and they'll say, just watched your last whatever. And I go, "Oh, I'm sorry." Why do we all do that?
Yeah.
How do we fix
Well,
it?
Well, I think that there's a couple things at play here. I mean, there's one is the feeling of sort of imposter syndrome, right? Somebody says something nice and we don't like it. And there's a uncomfortable nature. One, what helped me is, how do you feel when you compliment somebody or when you say thank you? Because they gave you a gift and say, wow, your story was really impactful. Thank you. There's a good feeling in giving that to somebody. And if somebody were to give you something, a gift, and you were just to then throw it back at them saying, I don't want it. That's what we do when we downplay it or we self-deprecate or we don't listen to it. Because it's a gift, right? And it keeps the energy flow going. And if somebody wants to help me and I don't accept it, then I'm robbing them of the experience that I love. I love helping people. Good, then allow people to help you, because you're robbing them of that great feeling that you feel when you help people. And I realized, I'm like, wow, that's really selfish. And so what I practice is just saying thank you. Well, thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you.
And being humble in the reception of it. And what I do is I also will acknowledge back to, you know what, I really appreciate you saying. Like somebody said to me one time, Rene, thanks for coming to the event. Really, thanks for showing up. I said, thank me? I said, thank you. I go, you know how silly I look up on that stage with nobody in the audience? I said, trust me, most of my career was to an empty audience. And so I said, the appreciation is mutual. Thank you. And I'm so glad you enjoyed today. So I can accept a compliment, but also honor them back in return. That's what always felt good to me. And I didn't feel good of just taking it, you know, but there's a way to accept and honor at the same time. And, you know, that means a lot coming from somebody like you, you know, thank you. That means a lot. I'm a big fan of your show. And so, you know, I'm glad I'm able to have an impact on somebody like you. And so there's those types of things that are mutual. And then sometimes it's just, you know, wow, thank you so much. That was unexpected. You made my day. Thank you. And giving them the gift that they actually had an impact on you. And so for me, I go, and I also had to be honest with myself. Do I like those compliments? Yeah, of course we do. You know, when we uncomfortable is the difference between liking something and being uncomfortable with it is very different. Yeah. I might like it. I'm still uncomfortable with it. Well, that's okay. It's not about you. And when I say the proverbial you, right? Yeah. So I think that for me, it's realizing that I don't want to rob them of that either.
I love that. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Motivation. I
do remember, just FYI, I do have
see?
a 130. So I do have about 5.
My last question for you is about motivation. I often say that a belief system does what motivation says is possible.
A belief system does what motivation says is possible. Okay, I'm going to sit with that. Keep going.
And so I say, you know, you can have your wife write all the pithy lipstick quotes on the mirror and fire you up, and you know everybody that's gone to the events and rah, but that motivation often subsides unless you have a belief system that forces you to take action.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that, you know, one thing I don't like to be called is a motivational speaker. Mm-hmm. I really don't like being called a motivational speaker, and the reason is because, you know, just talked about it. Motivation wears off. It is a short-term feeling of typically adrenaline. And then it's not even what motivation's about. I mean, there's internal motivation, external, we call it internal locus of control, or an external locus of control. If you have an internal locus of control, you're self-motivated. You found the location of motivation within. If it's external, then you're waiting for somebody to come by and turn you on, right? So somebody fire me up. And Jim Rohn used to say, well, what if they don't show up? Like, okay, I can't wait for that person that may not show up. I'll embrace the people that do show up, which is great, but I have to find that internal piece that gets me going. And your belief system is a reflection of values. It's a reflection of vision and possibility and what could be. And what's interesting, if you can envision something, you trigger dopamine. People think dopamine is a reward hormone. It's not. It's not when you achieve something. Because when you achieve the beach home, dopamine goes away. It's in the pursuit of the dream home. It's in the pursuit of the purpose. The dopamine is the cheerleader because it's secreted in the anticipation of reward. That's why dopamine secretes when we're gambling, because we don't know if the next pull of the handle might be the one. People that play the lotto, I think in Minnesota, it's like $2 billion. Even for me, I'm like, well, maybe I should try it for the first time in 30 years. It's like the anticipation of reward, a little dopamine hit. You don't know if social media, well, who's going to be liking this? And so dopamine is in the anticipation. It's the cheerleader. But if you're doing something and I'm getting dopamine in the pursuit of gambling or in the pursuit of seeing who liked my social media post, at the end of that, there's no reward. There's no actual purpose or any sort of asset that's been gained. But if you're doing it in the pursuit of a vision of creating something, and you achieve that thing, that the happiness will come and go, but the achievement lasts. The thing that the people that you help last. And I think kind of how we started, the purpose isn't happiness. I think the only times we're happy, somebody once said that, I don't want to be the person's happiness. I want to be the one that when the flood comes, I want to be the one who built the ark. And to build the ark, it's sacrifice, it's hard work, it's toil. You've got to give up a lot of things, say no to a lot of different things. But man, that moment that people show up and they need help and you can help, there's no more joyous. It's not even joyous. It's fulfilling. It's not even happy. It's like something bigger than that.
Deeper.
And it was all worth it. All worth it. So I think the only purpose in life is to be of utility, to be of service to others.
I love it. We're going to end there. You just changed your social media handle. Kind of freaked me out. I had to make sure it was you 3 times.
Thank you.
Tell the folks where to find you and everything else. And we're obviously going to put all this in the transcripts as well.
Yeah, we're doing 2 videos a day right now on Learn with Rene, Rene, Learn with Rene. And the old one, which was See Rene Speak, is being shut down in a couple of weeks. So please, there's no underscores, there's nothing. It's just Learn with Rene, Rene. And please follow me. I'll follow you back. Send me a message, all that stuff.
Yeah. And then you're putting together quite a few events. If the people listening want to go and attend those events, how do they get in touch?
We've got a fun one coming up called Designing Your Best Year Ever. It's December 7th. It's a virtual event. We wanted to do something that was available to everyone. And what I'd offer is, people that can't afford it, just let me know. And to your clients that are convicted or incarcerated right now, can they attend events like this virtually?
Yeah, I can get it plugged in inside.
Well, we'll work that out. I'll give you some free passes to get in on that one.
That would be insane.
Like a lot of them. So we'll give them a code, get them all in there. We just got to figure out how many so the thing can handle it. But I want this to be something everybody can do. So it's only $97. And if you can't afford it, send me a message. We'll get you in.
I love it. I can't thank you enough. Truly honored, truly grateful. And we'll be in touch.
Honor was all mine. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.